So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a real trip down memory lane for me, because Popeye was one of the earliest arcade games I fell in love with, and I love arcade games. Like, I really, truly do. Anytime that I've had the opportunity to go to a really good arcade, there's one down on the pier in San Francisco that's excellent. There's another one, the Pinball Arcade in Las Vegas. Those are a couple of locations that are like beautifully large, amazing, big buildings where you can really pump some quarters into some old school machines. Anyway, so yeah, love me some arcade madness. And back in the day, there were two locations where arcade games came into play that were important to me and my development. One was the ice cream parlor, which didn't open until a few years later, but that's where I played Nintendo games, NES games, for the first time. I played Super Mario Bros. And I played Castlevania on one of those, flat tabletop, old school type arcade things that Nintendo was putting out at the time, so that people could get used to playing their games. Anyway, crazy times. So yeah, ice cream parlor. The other place was the movie theater, and the movie theater had 3 games. One of them was Ms. Pac-Man, which I didn't care about at all because I could play Pac-Man at home on my Atari 800 XL because it had like arcade perfect Pac-Man on it. I'm telling you, if you've never played Pac-Man on the 8-bit Atari line, not the 2600, the home computer line that came out after the 2600 was dying its horrible death in '83, and Atari was like, let's do home computers. People are done messing around with these games. They want they want word processing, but they also wanted arcade perfect versions of Pac-Man. Anyway, so yeah, one of the things I did not have, the other 2 games, Rock and Rope, which did come out on the Atari, and Popeye, which I don't remember if it did. I never had a copy if it did. But yeah, the NES had some really good arcade perfect games. It's just that, like, by the time they were coming out, people were kind of tired of the whole cash grab of paying for games that had already been out in the arcade for a while, because that's what Atari had done, and that market had crashed, and so people didn't really want to be like, oh, I've pumped quarters into this machine at my local movie theater or wherever, or pizza place, and now I'm done. Like, I don't need to take it home. I don't need to spend however many dollars on a home version of the game, especially because of how people's trust was betrayed with that awful Atari 2600 Pac-Man. So, like, I don't know how big Popeye was ever on the NES. It was one of the launch titles of the Famicom, because the Famicom came out 2 years before the NES came out in America, and so Super Mario Bros. Was not even that was not even a thing yet. And so yeah, that was a launch title for the American version of the NES, which we all know the story. They sold it in toy stores rather than electronics stores, and that proved to be the difference. They got their foot in the door. But the main thing was that, like, by the time there was that 1985 release, Nintendo had a killer app that was not on arcade machines for the most part. I mean, most people didn't know it from the arcade machines because it debuted on the NES. And that's how a lot of people played it for the first time. most people. I'm one of the weird exceptions because my family never bought an NES. I didn't get my first one till I was in college. Anyway, so yeah, like these arcade perfect translations of games, of these like simple single screen platformers like Popeye, they're just like, you know, who is this for anymore, you know, by the time they came out. I mean, it was very popular in Japan, where, you know, the Famicom launched with, you know, Popeye and Donkey Kong, and I think Donkey Kong Jr. were the three games. Anyway, regardless, but like, yeah, it was a launch title for the Famicom, which people were like, okay, all right, in Japan, you know, because the market crashed everywhere. And then, yeah, when it finally came to America, we were more interested in the original properties. And so single screen platformers like this not only became forgotten and sort of buried in history, but like the entire genre of these single screen platformer kind of died. I mean, you know, later on Nintendo would release Wrecking Crew, which stars Mario, and it's a decent game, but like that was it for single screen platformers from Nintendo for forever. Like, you just did not see them. And they really, that's not a thing they do anymore. I mean, unless you want to count Smash Bros, which I guess technically single screen and platformy, but like it's a fighter first and foremost. But anyway, yeah, thing is that the genre is essentially dead. Except for like, you know, one-offs like Anna Lynn, which is a very fun game on Steam. Very, very fun arcade, single screen arcade game that was made recently. So yeah, there are still decent games being made, but the decent ones being made are like copying the vibe of games like this, because Popeye has delightful music. It's got like really interesting character design, because these characters had existed for like 100 years before this game got made, because Popeye cartoons had existed since the dawn of time. They're like etched into cave walls in France, you know, like they're very old cartoons. And so yeah, like Bluto and Olive Oil and Sweet Pea, and I don't remember what the mean old lady is called. I forget her name, but yeah, like these characters totally existed prior to this game being a thing. But like, who cared about Popeye? When this came out, there was that Robin Williams movie, which has since become a cult classic, which I really love and my family loves, but like at the time people were like, this movie is terrible. And my family we're the kind of folks who enjoy some like Mystery Science Theater 3000 type business, so we're like, a terrible movie, you say? Like, and it's a musical? Go on. Like, yeah, we're all about it. But like, yeah, who cared about Popeye in 1980? You know, this debuted 1983 in Japan, 1985 in America. It was a launch title for the NES here. And like, who cared? You know, who was excited for this to be one of their first games? Because the NES represented a step forward. You know, the gameplay is simple. You just go around and collect the hearts and try not to get punched. Bluto has a few attacks. He can punch you from below, he can punch you from above, he can throw bottles at you, and he can punch you in the face directly if you get too close. And that's about it. You know, and you just have to learn to strategically avoid him. And, you know, honestly, the interesting thing is that this is the best I've ever done at this game. Like, I've never been good at Popeye in the arcade. Like, I love playing. Boy, I love to play this game. It's super fun. great visuals, you know, for the time, and great music for the time. You know, it still holds up. It is still fun. You just have to, like, be okay that you are playing a high score chase single screen platformer. That, like, you know, it just, this was the first time, I think, in my entire life that I've made it past that ship stage. And, you know, and then it just loops back around, and that's what Game B is. If you select Game B, it just starts you off on the harder version of the level where the mean old lady is throwing skulls at you, in addition to, which operate basically like the Hellstones from Jumpman. If you've ever played that game, which you should have because it's awesome. Talk about some 8-bit Atari goodness. Jumpman, there you go, has nothing to do with Mario. It's an Epix game. It's its own thing. But yeah, so this is a great, for its time, platformer. Like, you know, Super Mario Bros. Came and just wrecked this, but do not forget that Mario Bros. Themselves started out in a single screen platformer, and, like, you know, Mario shows up for the first time in Donkey Kong as Jumpman, and then the Mario Bros. Luigi shows up for the first time in Mario Bros. Where you're stomping turtles and getting coins in a single screen platformer, which is not as good as this one. I'm just gonna come right out and say it. Like, I always found Mario Bros. Kind of frustrating, to be honest. And don't challenge me to a game of it, because I will lose and I will be mad at you. So it doesn't go well for me. But yeah, anyway, this game, it's very simple, very straightforward, and among the games of this type, it is undeniably one of the best. Like, just hands down, arcade style game, single screen platformer, one of the best. Like, absolutely no question. But again, and this is the theme of the week, genres that who plays them anymore, you know? Like, that's what it's all about. So, yeah, fun, interesting. I really had a good time going back and playing it. I found myself thoroughly entertained the entire time. I love the vibe, I love the music. The controls were really tight, but probably mostly because I was playing it in emulation, and I got a personal best, and so that's solid. What more do you want at that point? Except for I openly recognize that this is a game that, like, unless you are an elite player or chasing after an elite score, where you're like, no, I need to practice. Because, you know, there are people who high score chase everything. You know, if it's high score chaseable, you know, somebody has a high score in it. And, yeah, and it's being contested on Twin Galaxies for all we know. Anyway, but regardless, the point is that, like, yes, this is not the type of game that you really see anymore. And yes, you know, it's like a hair metal album, like a really good hair metal album that came out in 1982 or 1992, you know, like, that when Nirvana had just completely changed the world, and you know, the ground had shifted under their feet. They just hadn't realized it yet, you know. And so, is the album still good if you're in the mood for hair metal? Yes, but like, in 1992, who was in the mood for hair metal at that point? Nirvana was new, you know? Like, it's not like now where you can go back and you can have nostalgia for whatever you want, because it is all there, and all the new stuff is crap. No, I'm just kidding. There's a lot of great new stuff. I'm not gonna lie, there is a never-ending, a ceaseless buffet of excellence. Yeah, which is how you want it to be. You never want to run out of good video games, good books, good movies, good music. Like you never want to run out. That's if that's your life, is like, oh, there's too much good stuff for me to enjoy. Good. Like, because the alternate is not great. Like, just sit around and think about the inevitability of death otherwise, and who wants to do that? Anyway, regardless, let me put a final score on this, because I have no doubt had to loop the footage by this point, and you were watching this and you're thinking, am I seeing this for the second time? Sorry, you probably are. Anyway, people, let me put a final score on this, and then we shall call it quits. Okay, so this is a bit of a nostalgia score. Just deal with it. It is what it is. It's probably too high. I say that going in, but I didn't feel good giving it a 7.5. That's why I'm giving Popeye on the NES an 8 out of a possible 10 sea hags, because that's apparently what that mean lady is called, the sea hag. She doesn't have a name? People are just like, well, you know how you're ugly, and also you live down by the sea, because I'm assuming poverty. You are the sea hag, and we shall treat you accordingly. Maybe that's why she's so mean. She's like, you know, I didn't ask to be called a hag every day of my life, but if you're gonna call me that, maybe I'll act like it. Anyway, regardless, it's 8 out of a possible 10 sea hags. That's the score, people. Sorry for dragging this one on longer than it needed to be. I do like this game perhaps more than I should. Forgive my ramblings on the topic of games from my youth, but like, this is one that I really loved back in the day. So deal with my score, and tell me if you're like, no, I think that's way too high for this game. Like, yeah, feel free to tell me if you disagree, because I'm okay with that. All right, people, that'll do it for this. I will see you in the next one. Okay, bye.